The search for Paula Jean Welden did not end because they found her. It ended because they ran out of ways to look. And what her father said about that failure, in public, to reporters, while his daughter was still missing, would change the state of Vermont forever. She was born in Stamford, Connecticut in 1928, the eldest of 4 daughters. Her father, William Archibald Welden, was an industrial engineer known for designing household objects, the kind of practical, well-made things that ended up in kitchens across the country. Paula graduated high school in 1945 and enrolled at Bennington College, where she studied art, though she had recently started thinking about switching her focus to botany. By the fall of 1946, she was a sophomore at Bennington College, a small liberal arts school tucked into the southwestern corner of Vermont. December 1st, 1946. A Sunday. The campus was quiet, the semester winding down. Paula had no classes. She told her roommate, Elizabeth Johnson, that she was going for a walk. She left their dormitory around 2:45 in the afternoon. She was wearing a red coat with a fur collar, jeans, and a pair of sneakers. Inadequate clothing for December in the Green Mountains, where temperatures drop fast after the sun starts to sink. But she was young. She was in good health, and she was only going for a walk on the Long Trail, a footpath that runs the length of Vermont. Elizabeth Johnson did not report her missing that night. She assumed Paula had gone to the library to study. When Paula did not return to their room, Elizabeth thought nothing of it. It was not until the next morning, when Paula still had not come back, that Elizabeth notified the college. That delay, those 12 hours between when Paula vanished and when anyone knew she was gone, is the first crack in this case. But it is not the one that matters most. The last confirmed sightings of Paula that afternoon form a short, precise chain. A gas station owner named Danny Fager saw her walking near campus. A truck driver named Louis Knapp gave her a ride to the trailhead at the base of Glastonbury Mountain. And then a group of hikers on the trail itself spoke to her, warned her that the temperature was dropping, that she should turn back before dark. She did not turn back. Those hikers were the last people to see Paula Jean Welden alive. The search began the next day, but here is where the story takes the turn most people never hear about. Vermont, in 1946, had no state police force. There was no centralized agency to coordinate a missing person investigation, no trained detectives to take charge of the search, no single command structure to organize the hundreds of volunteers who would soon arrive. The response fell to local sheriffs, who had no experience with cases like this, and to Paula's father, a businessman from Stamford, Connecticut, who drove to Vermont the day he learned his daughter was gone. He found chaos. There were approximately 370 volunteers on the mountain by the end of the first week. They were well-intentioned, local people who showed up with dogs and lanterns, but they had no training in search and rescue. They had no maps of the long trail that accounted for the terrain around Glastonbury Mountain, and they had no clear chain of command. Paula's father watched this and began to speak publicly. He criticized the disorganized search to reporters, and his frustration was echoed by local newspapers. He used his influence to call in state police from New York and Connecticut, because Vermont, at the time, had none of its own. The state of Vermont heard him. Here is the detail that changes how you understand this case. The Vermont State Police was formed in 1947, the year after Paula disappeared. Historians and the agency itself have tied the push to create a statewide police force directly to the botched response to her disappearance. The tragedy of Paula Welden did not just remain unsolved. It helped create the institution that now handles missing persons investigations across the entire state. But her own case was never solved. The search parties combed Glastonbury Mountain for weeks. They found nothing. No tracks, no clothing, no evidence of a struggle, no body. The terrain is dense with thick woods, ravines, and abandoned logging roads. It would have been possible to miss a person in that landscape, especially if they had fallen into a crevice or been buried under snow. But the searchers were thorough, and after several weeks the effort wound down. The official position of the Vermont State Police is that no conclusive outcome was ever determined. No evidence of foul play has ever been found. but many people believe she was murdered and buried somewhere near the Long Trail. There is no evidence to support that belief. There is also no evidence to rule it out. In the weeks that followed, tips came in from far outside Vermont. A waitress in Fall River, Massachusetts, told investigators she had served dinner to a young woman matching Paula's description the day after she vanished. Agitated, alone, unable to pay, it was promising enough that Paula's own father disappeared for 36 hours to chase it down himself, without telling anyone where he'd gone. It led nowhere. Around the same time, a train conductor reported thinking he'd seen her boarding in South Carolina. That lead was checked and dismissed as well. Lead after lead, checked and dismissed, until there was nothing left to check. Here is where the case enters stranger territory. Paula's disappearance was not the only one in the area. Between 1945 and 1950, 4 other people vanished in the same region near Glastonbury Mountain. The disappearances were never connected by any official investigation, but decades later, a writer coined the term Bennington Triangle to describe the area where these cases clustered. This label was applied in the 1990s, long after the events. It is not a contemporary finding. It was not used by investigators in the 1940s. It is a nickname that arose from popular curiosity, not from evidence. But the coincidence is worth noting. 5 people, 5 years, 1 stretch of forest. The first of them came a year before Paula. In November of 1945, a 74-year-old hunting guide named Mitty Rivers told his son-in-law he was heading off alone in Bickford Hollow, near Glastonbury Mountain, and that he would be back in time for lunch. He never returned. By that afternoon, the hunting party was calling his name and firing rifles into the air, hoping he would hear an answer. Within a week, the search had grown to roughly 300 civilians, along with soldiers sent from Fort Devens. They searched the same ground Paula would walk a year later. The only thing they ever found was a single unspent rifle cartridge. Rivers, a man who had worked those woods for decades, was never seen again. Paula's is the most famous of the 5. It is also the only one that directly led to a change in state law enforcement. There is a man whose name appears in the case files, though he was never charged with anything. Local sources spell his name Gadet or Godet. He reportedly told 2 acquaintances that he knew within 100 feet where Paula Welden was buried. When questioned, he later said it was just talk. He claimed he made the story up. No evidence has ever surfaced to support his claim. The Vermont State Police have never closed the case. It remains open. Paula's story is still a regular subject of inquiry at the Bennington Free Library and the Bennington Museum, nearly 80 years later. In 2021, Parade magazine included her disappearance in a list of the strangest unsolved mysteries in the country. If you are the kind of person who follows these cases because you believe answers matter, you already understand why this one refuses to close. It is not just that Paula Welden vanished. It is that her case helped change the system that now investigates disappearances in Vermont, and that system has never been able to solve her own. Those original witness statements from 1946 are brief. They were taken by local sheriffs who had no training in forensic interviewing. The witnesses who spoke to Paula that afternoon were not formally interviewed until days after the event, and by then the details had already started to blur. The case has taken on a life of its own in the decades since. It has been featured in books, podcasts, and documentaries. The lack of resolution creates a vacuum that speculation rushes to fill, but the facts are stubborn and scarce. Paula Jean Welden was 18 years old. She left her dormitory at 2:45 p.m. on December 1st, 1946, wearing a red coat with a fur collar, jeans, and sneakers. She was seen by 3 sets of witnesses in sequence. She was reported missing the next morning. Her father organized a volunteer search and publicly criticized the state's response. And 1 year later, the Vermont State Police was created. If this detail caught your attention the way it caught investigators, you already understand why this case refuses to close. The institution that exists, partly because of Paula Welden, has never been able to account for what happened to her. That irony is not lost on anyone who has studied the case. And the question at the heart of it all remains unanswered. What happened to Paula Jean Welden in the hours after she walked onto the Long Trail? Write this in the comments. What is the one question you would ask the lead investigator if you had 5 minutes with the case file? There are people who believe Paula Welden simply got lost. The argument goes like this. She was alone, the temperature dropped, she became disoriented, she succumbed to exposure, and her body was concealed by the forest and never recovered. This is the most parsimonious explanation. It requires no unknown assailant, no hidden motive, no conspiracy. It requires only a young woman who underestimated the wilderness, the cold, and the early darkness of a December evening in the Green Mountains. The counter-argument is this. The search parties were extensive. Hundreds of volunteers, over weeks, covering the terrain around Glastonbury Mountain. If she had died of exposure within walking distance of the trail, her body should have been found. Dogs were used. Experienced hikers were consulted. The area was searched methodically, and nothing was discovered. Here is a detail that the record does not fully agree on. In the days after Paula vanished, Elizabeth Johnson described her as being in good spirits, with no sign of distress. But later, Johnson revised that account. She told investigators that Paula had actually seemed troubled in the weeks before she disappeared, following a falling out with her father shortly before Thanksgiving. Paula's father, for his part, floated a theory that a young man back in Stamford, someone interested in his daughter, might have been connected to her disappearance. No evidence was ever found to support that theory either. There was no note. There was no confirmed indication that Paula intended to leave or harm herself. But the conflicting accounts of her state of mind that November mean the case cannot rule out a voluntary departure as cleanly as it might first appear, even though nothing was ever found to confirm it. The private investigator hired by a Stamford newspaper, a man named Raymond Schindler, had his own theory, not about her state of mind but about the trail itself. He noted that near where Lewis Knapp had dropped her off, there were 2 trails, both called the Long Trail, within 50 or 60 yards of each other. The road sign near that spot could easily have pointed Paula toward the wrong one, a trail she had never hiked before, unfamiliar and unmarked in her memory of the area. It is a small, almost mundane theory, no monster, no killer, just a sign, a fork in the road, and a wrong turn into unfamiliar woods as the light was failing. That absence of any confirmed motive to leave voluntarily, combined with the absence of any physical evidence of an accident or a crime, narrows the possibilities without resolving them. If she did not leave by choice, and she was not lost to exposure, then the remaining category is abduction or homicide. But no evidence of any of these has ever been found. The case exists in a state of permanent suspension between these possibilities. The Bennington Triangle has its own mythology now. The case is sometimes said to have inspired Shirley Jackson's 1951 novel Hangsaman, written while she was living in North Bennington. Jackson's book is a work of psychological fiction, not a supernatural tale, but the connection between the two has, over the decades, blurred in popular retellings, folding a real disappearance into local legend. The documented events are these. Paula Jean Welden left her dormitory at 2:45 p.m. on December 1st, 1946. She was wearing a red coat with a fur collar, jeans, and sneakers. She was seen by a gas station owner, a truck driver, and a group of hikers. She was reported missing the next morning. A volunteer search found nothing. 1 year later, the Vermont State Police was created. Her case remains open. The rest is speculation. This is the story of Paula Welden. It is also the story of every unsolved missing persons case in the United States. The names that never appear on a national news broadcast, the families who wait decades, the files that stay open because no one has the courage to close them without answers. Paula's case is different in one specific way. It helped change the system. Most missing persons cases do not. If you are the kind of person who follows these cases because you believe that answers matter, you already understand something that most people do not. The work of keeping these stories alive is not about solving them. It is about refusing to let them be erased. The case that changed the system still waits for the system it created. The file stays open. If you have any information about this case, Vermont State Police still accepts tips today. And if you want to keep following cases like this one, stay with us. There's another disappearance from the same years worth opening next.